The great hall of the Valderin Empire stretched before Empress Cathara like a sea of judgment. Thousands of eyes watched her from the gallery above. Ambassadors, generals, and noble families had gathered to witness the selection ceremony. It was a tradition older than the empire itself, and today Keith would choose her personal guardian. From the tribute, warriors sent by vassal worlds, she sat on the crystal throne, her silver skin catching the light from the massive windows behind her. She was young for an empress, barely 30 cycles old. Her father had died 6 months ago, and since then, every moment of her life had become a performance for others to judge. The candidates await your inspection, Your Radiance, said advisor Lena, an elderly female who had served 3 generations of rulers. Her voice was kind but tired. At Kid H I looked down at the arena floor where 42 warriors stood in a perfect line. They came from across the empire. There were Vorex warriors with their forearms and armored skin. There were Kelani hunters with eyes that could see heat. Signatures, there were massive Grundar soldiers who stood 9 ft tall and could crush stone with their bare hands, and at the end of the line, almost invisible, among the giants stood a human. Cathara had heard about humans. Earth had been integrated into the empire just 5 years ago. They were a young species from a small world. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities. The other species called them soft, fragile, and unremarkable. Most people wondered why they had been allowed to send a tribute warrior at all. High Commander Vorath stepped forward. He was a Valderin like Kithara, but older and harder. His silver skin was covered in battle scars, and his yellow eyes burned with ambition. Your Radiance, he said, bowing slightly, may I recommend Candidate 17. He is Grath of the Grunder, champion of the border wars. He would bring great honor to your guard. Tythara looked at the massive Grundar. He was impressive, certainly, but she noticed how Vor smiled when he spoke of him. She had learned to distrust that smile. The choice is mine alone, she said. That is the tradition. Vorath smile faded slightly. Of course, Your Radiance, I only wish to offer guidance. Guidance, everyone wanted to guide her. Every advisor, every general, every noble house wanted to put their hands on her decisions. She was supposed to be the most powerful being in 40-star systems, but she felt like a puppet with too many strings. The ceremony demanded that she walk among the candidates and inspect them personally. She descended from the throne and began her slow march down the line. Each warrior knelt as she passed, offering weapons and pledges of loyalty. The Vorthax candidate spoke of glory and conquest. The Kini hunter promised silent death to her enemies. The Grundar champion Grath simply growled and flexed his massive arms. When Cathara reached the end of the line, she finally looked at the human. He was not impressive. He stood about 6 ft tall with brown hair and plain features. He wore simple armor that seemed almost primitive compared to the others. His eyes were a calm blue, and he watched her approach without the fear or aggression she had seen in the others. He knelt like the rest. Cole Matthews, he said, Earth Colony 7, you are far from home. Cathara said, home is where duty takes me, Your Radiance. She studied him for a moment. There was something in his voice, not pride, not submission, just calm, as if he had already accepted whatever would happen and found peace with it. She turned and walked back toward her throne. Hall fell silent. This was the moment everyone had waited for. The Empress would point to her chosen guardian, and that warrior would serve her until death. Cathara looked at the line of candidates. She saw Voreth watching her with hungry eyes. She saw the noble houses whispering among themselves, placing bets and making deals. She saw her entire court treating this sacred ceremony like a game of politics. Thought something broke inside her, a small rebellion, quiet and personal. She closed her eyes. The hall gasped. This was not part of the tradition. The Empress was supposed to study the candidates carefully to weigh their strengths and choose the mightiest. Cathara raised her hand, eyes still closed, and pointed. Him, she said. She opened her eyes. Her finger was aimed at the end of the line, at the human dot. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the whispers began, spreading through the hall like fire through dry grass. The human is this joke. As she lost her mind, Voreth stepped forward, his face twisted with barely controlled anger. Your radiance. Surely you do not mean I have made my choice, Cathara said. Her voice was steady, even though her heart was racing. The tradition demands that my choice be honored, or do you wish to break with tradition? I commander. Vor's jaw tightened. No, your radiance, but the human is unsuitable. He cannot protect you as the others could. Then I will die poorly protected, Cathara said. But I will die having made my own choice. For once she had not meant to say that last part. It slipped out before she could stop it. The hall fell silent again, and she saw something flicker in the eyes of several advisors. Concern perhaps, or guilt. Cole Matthews walked forward and knelt before her throne. He did not seem surprised or overwhelmed. He simply accepted the moment as it came. I pledge my life to your service, your radiance, he said. I will stand between you and any threat until my body fails or you release me from my duty. Looked down at him, this small, fragile human who now held one of the most important positions in the Empire. She had chosen him to make a point to rebel against the hands that pulled her strings. Thought she had no idea what she had truly done. Rise, Cole Matthews, she said. Rise and take your place at my side. He stood and moved to stand beside her throne. The other candidates were dismissed. The ceremony was over, but as the hall slowly emptied, Cathara noticed that Vath remained, watching the human with cold, calculating eyes. She had made an enemy. Today, perhaps she had always had that enemy, but now he had a reason to act. And beside her stood her only shield, a human from a small world that no one respected. Cathar wondered if she had just signed her own death. Cole Matthew stood quietly, his blue eyes scanning the room, missing nothing. He had been underestimated his entire life. He had learned to use that. The Empress did not know it yet, but a random choice might have been the wisest decision she ever made. The game had begun, and no one knew the rules except the human who had already survived worse odds than anyone in that hall could imagine. 3 weeks passed since the selection ceremony, and Cole Matthews had become the most talked about person in the Imperial Palace, but the talk was never kind. Servants whispered when he walked by, guards laughed behind his back, noble visitors would stare at him with open disgust, as if the Empress had chosen a pet animal to guard her instead of a proper warrior. Cole ignored all of it. He had a job to do. Every morning he woke before dawn and studied the palace Layouts, he memorized every corridor, every hidden passage, every window that could serve as an entry point for an assassin. He learned the names and faces of every servant, every guard, every regular visitor. He watched how people moved, how they spoke, how they behaved. When they thought no one was looking, the other guards thought he was wasting his time. What good was studying hallways when you could barely lift the heavy swords that Valdor warriors used? They did not understand. Humans had never won wars through strength. They won through preparation, through observation, through understanding their enemies better than those enemies understood themselves. On the 10th day an accident happened. Cole was walking through the training grounds when a practice sword flew through the air and struck him in the back. He fell forward, pain shooting through his spine. Dropped behind him, a group of Valdoran warriors laughed. "Forgive me, human," said the largest one, a soldier named Crid under High Commander Morith. My hand slipped. Cole stood slowly. His back screamed in pain, but he kept his face calm. He picked up the practice sword and held it out to Krath. "No harm done," he said. Krat did not take the sword. Instead, he smiled and stepped closer. "Perhaps we should test your skills, human. The Empress should know what kind of warrior guards her sleep." Other soldiers gathered around, forming a circle. There would be no escape, and calling for help would only make things worse. Cole understood what was happening. This was a message from VH, delivered through his loyal dog. "If you wish," Cole said. Krath laughed and drew a training sword. It was a heavy blade, designed for Valdoran strength. In his hands, it looked like a normal weapon. In Cole's hands, it would be slow and awkward. Cole picked up a different sword, a lighter blade meant for speed rather than power. The watching soldiers laughed again. "Begin," someone shouted. Krath attacked immediately, swinging his heavy blade in a wide arc meant to crush Cole's guard and knock him to the ground. It was a killing blow disguised as a training strike. Cole was not there when the blade arrived. He had watched Krath for 15 days. He had seen him train, seen him fight, seen him celebrate victories at the drinking halls. Krath always attacked the same way, always led with his right side, always overcommitted to his first strike, because no one had ever survived it. Cole stepped left, letting the blade pass by his shoulder close enough to feel the wind. Then he moved 3 quick strikes, 1 to the knee, 1 to the elbow, 1 to the throat. None of them were hard enough to cause real damage, but all of them hit nerve points that Cole had studied in human anatomy books and then adapted to Valdom biology. Kraft's leg buckled. His arm went numb. His throat seized, making him gasp for air. He fell to his knees, eyes wide with shock. Cole stepped back and lowered his sword. "I yield," he said calmly. "You have defeated me." Training ground was silent. Everyone had seen what happened. The human had won clearly and completely, but he was offering Krath a way to save face. Krath stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "The human fought well," he managed to say. "For a human." Crowd dispersed quickly. No one wanted to talk about what they had seen, but Tal knew that the story would spread and it would change slightly with each telling. By tomorrow, some would say Krath had won easily. Others would whisper the truth, and High Commander Vor would learn that his message had been returned with interest. That evening, Cole stood at his usual post outside the Empress's private chambers. The door opened, and Advisor Lena appeared. The Empress wishes to speak with you, she said. Her voice was different now, less dismissive than before. Cole entered the chamber. Kedara stood by the window looking out at the night sky. She did not turn when he entered. I watched your fight today, she said from my balcony. I apologize for the disturbance. Your radiance, you won. She turned to face him. You won against a warrior twice your size, trained since childhood for combat. How? Cole considered his answer carefully. I watched him. I learned how he moves, how he thinks. Strength means nothing if your enemy knows what you will do before you do it. Keith studied him with new interest. And the ending, why did you let him claim victory? Because a humiliated enemy becomes a desperate enemy. A forgiven enemy might become something else. What might he become? That depends on him, but at least now he has a choice. Kithora was quiet for a moment, then she almost smiled. You are strange, Cole Matthews. Not what I expected. What did you expect? Your radiance? I do not know, perhaps nothing. You were a random choice. A small rebellion against my advisors. I did not think about what you might actually be. She walked to a table where a servant had left her evening meal. She reached for the wine glass, but Cole moved faster. His hand closed over hers, stopping her. Forgive me, he said quietly, but I would not drink that. Kether's eyes widened. What? Cole lifted the glass to his nose and inhaled slightly. The smell is wrong, Valderim. Wine has a sweet note, but this has something else underneath, something bitter. He dipped his finger in the wine and touched it to his tongue, just enough to taste. Poison, he said, slow acting. It would look like a natural illness. Keith stared at the glass in horror. How did you know? I have been studying Valderin food and drink since I arrived. I know what they should smell and taste like. He set the glass down. Someone in your household wants you dead, your radiance, and they are patient enough to wait for the right moment. Keith sank into a chair, her face pale. I knew there were those who opposed me, but this is the beginning. Cole said, there will be more attempts. Whoever did this will try again. What should I do? Cole knelt before her, meeting her eyes directly. Trust carefully, watch everyone, and let me do my job. Looked at the human and knelt before her. Random choice, small rebellion. She was beginning to realize that fate had given her something far more valuable than she had known. I chose you by chance, she said softly. Chance gave you the opportunity, Cole replied. What you do with it is up to you. For the first time since her father's death, Empress Cathara felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. 2 months after the selection ceremony, the Empire began to crack. It started with whispers from the border systems. The Nefkai, species conquered 3 generations ago, had begun refusing imperial orders. Tax collectors were turned away. Military outposts were surrounded by silent crowds who simply stared until the soldiers left. Then the whispers became screams. 3 systems declared open rebellion. Nefkai fighters attacked supply ships. Communication towers were destroyed. Imperial governors fled for their lives. The War Council met in the great chamber beneath the palace. High Commander Vareth stood before a massive holographic map, pointing at the spreading red zones that marked rebel territory. The response must be swift and total, he said. His voice echoed through the chamber. We burn their colonies, execute their leaders, and Remind the galaxy what happens when species forget their place. The other generals nodded. This was the Valder way, crush rebellion before it could spread, make examples so terrible that no one would dare try again. Empress Cathara sat on her throne, listening. Cole stood behind her, silent as always. But she had learned to watch his face. During these meetings, small changes in his expression told her more than hours of council debate. Right now his jaw was tight, his eyes were troubled. Your Radiance, V said, do I have your permission to mobilize the fleet? Keith did not answer immediately. Instead, she asked a question that surprised everyone. Why did they rebel? The chamber fell silent. Voreth frowned. Your Radiance, the Nefkai have been subjects for 3 generations. Why now? What changed? It does not matter why, Morith said. What matters is that they must be punished. I disagree. Keith leaned forward. If we do not understand why they rebel, we cannot prevent future rebellions. We will spend eternity crushing uprisings instead of building a stable empire with respect. Your Radiance, this is not the time for philosophy, this is war. Then perhaps I need a different perspective. Keith turned to look at Cole. Guardian, you come from a young species. What would humans do in this situation? The general stared in disbelief. Asking a human for military advice was like asking a child how to run a bank. Cole stepped forward. He knew that speaking here was dangerous, but the Empress had asked, Your Radiance, I am no general, but I know something about rebellion. Speak freely. Cole looked at the map. Humans have a long history of uprisings. We have been on both sides, the rulers and the rebels, and we learned a hard truth. You cannot crush an idea with soldiers. You can kill fighters, but their children will remember. Their grandchildren will remember. The hate passes down through generations until one day when you are weak, they rise. Again, Voreth laughed coldly. Then, what do you suggest? Surrender? No. Understand? Cole pointed at the map. Nefkai did not wake up one morning and choose death. Something pushed them to this. Find out what, address it. Give them a reason to put down their weapons. And if they refuse, then you fight. But you fight knowing you tried everything else first, and when you win, you offer peace instead of punishment. Enemies who are forgiven can become allies. Enemies who are humiliated become eternal threats. The chamber erupted in argument. Generals shouted about tradition and strength. Advisors demanded that the human be removed from the council, but Cathara raised their hand and silence fell. I will consider all options, she said. This meeting is ended. That night Cathara summoned Cole to her private study. Maps and reports covered every surface. She had not slept, and her silver skin looked pale with exhaustion. Tell me more, she said. Tell me about human rebellions. Cole spoke for hours. He told her about revolutions fought with farming tools against trained armies. He told her about peaceful protests that brought down empires. He told her about leaders who chose forgiveness over revenge and built nations that lasted centuries. Humans are not stronger than other species, he said. We are not smarter or faster, but we learned something that many powerful civilizations forget. True strength is not about crushing your enemies. It is about building something worth fighting for. Cathara listened to every word. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. I want you to go to the Nefkai, she said finally. Cole blinked. your radiance secretly without the council's knowledge. Find out what they want, see if peace is possible. If Voreth discovers this, he will call it treason. I know. Keith met his eyes. I'm asking you to risk everything for a chance at peace. Is that something you are willing to do? Cole thought of his wife killed during Earth's integration war. He thought of the hate he had carried for years, and the moment he had finally let it go, he thought of what might have been if someone had tried to understand instead of conquer. I will go, he said. The journey to Nefkai space took 3 days. Cole traveled in a small transport ship alone and unarmed. When he crossed into rebel territory, he expected to be shot down immediately. Instead, he was escorted to the surface by silent fighters. The Nefkai were tall and thin with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. They looked fragile, but Cole knew appearances could be deceiving. These people had survived 3 generations of occupation. They were stronger than they seemed. He met with their council in a ruined temple. The walls were scorched from Imperial bombardment decades ago. They had kept it damaged on purpose as a reminder. You are the human, said the eldest council member, a female named Sarah. We have heard of you, the Empress's strange choice. I am here to listen, Cole said. Tell me why you fight. And they told him. They spoke of children taken for labor camps. They spoke of sacred sites destroyed for mining operations. They spoke of promises broken and dignity stripped away year after year until death seemed better than another generation of chains. Cole listened without interrupting. When they finished, he did not make excuses or promises. I cannot undo what was done, he said, but I can carry your words to someone who might listen. If the Empress offers real change, not empty words, would you consider peace? Sarah studied him for a long moment. Why do you care? Human, your species has only been part of this empire for 5 years. This is not your fight. Cole thought carefully before answering, because I have seen what happens when hate is allowed to grow. I have buried people I loved because no one tried to understand. I do not want that for you or for the Empire or for anyone else. The council whispered among themselves. Finally, Sarah nodded. Bring us proof that the Empress is serious. Real proof. Not words. Then we will talk. Cole returned to the palace with a list of demands and a fragile hope, but he did not know that Thor's spies had tracked his journey. The High Commander now had evidence of secret negotiations with the enemy, and he intended to use it. The Festival of Ascension filled the capital with light and music. 1 year ago, Kithara had taken the throne. Tonight, the Empire celebrated her reign with parades, fireworks, and feasts that would last until dawn. But beneath the celebration, darkness moved. Cole stood at his usual post outside the grand ballroom. Something felt wrong. The guards seemed nervous. Servants avoided his eyes. The air itself felt heavy with secrets. Then the doors burst open and High Commander Voreth marched in with 50 armed soldiers. The music stopped. Dancers froze in place. Kithara rose from her throne, her face pale but composed. What is the meaning of this? She demanded. Voreth smiled. It was the smile of a man who had already won. Empress Kithara, he said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. I bring charges of treason against you and your human pet. The crowd gasped. Guards reached for weapons but hesitated, unsure who to obey. Veth held up a data Crystal, this contains evidence of secret negotiations with the Nethk rebels. The Empress sent her guardian to meet with our enemies to discuss terms. Behind the Council's back, she has betrayed the Empire. I saw peace. Cathara said, is that a crime? Peace with traitors is treason. The law is clear. Vorath turned to the crowd. Elder Council has reviewed the evidence and agreed Empress Cathara is unfit to rule. A military regency will be established until a proper successor can be chosen. Cole stepped forward, but soldiers immediately surrounded him. There were too many to fight, and the human Vorath continued will be executed at dawn for corrupting the Empress with his alien ideas. Cathara reached for Cole, but guards pulled her back. You cannot do this. I am the Empress. You were the Empress. Vorath said, now you are a prisoner. They were separated. Cathara was taken to her chambers under heavy guard. Cole was dragged to the deep cells beneath the palace, the ones reserved for enemies of the state. The cell was dark and cold. Cole sat on the stone floor thinking. He had perhaps 12 hours before sunrise. 12 hours to find a way out. He began to study his surroundings. The lock on his cell was old but solid. The guards changed shifts every 4 hours. The torch in the hallway flickered slightly every few minutes, which meant there was a draft somewhere, possibly an old ventilation system. Cole had been underestimated his entire life. People looked at humans and saw weakness. They never thought to look deeper, never wondered what skills a fragile species might develop to survive in a hostile universe. Patience was one such skill. Observation was another, and lockpicking, learned during a misspent youth on Earth, was a third. He waited until the guards changed shifts. The new guards were tired and bored. They talked to each other instead of watching the prisoners. Exactly as Cole had expected, he pulled a small wire from the lining of his boot. It was nothing special, just a piece of metal he had hidden there months ago in case of emergencies. Humans planned for the worst because they could not afford to be unprepared. The lock took 20 minutes. Cole moved in complete silence, following the draft through maintenance corridors that had not been used in decades, emerged in the palace gardens far from the main guards. Getting to Cathara was harder. Her chambers were on the 3rd floor, surrounded by loyal soldiers, but Cole had spent months studying this palace. He knew every shadow, every blind spot, every moment when guards looked the wrong way. He climbed the outer wall, using cracks and ledges that Valdoran architects had never considered security risks. Humans were smaller and lighter than most species. What was impossible for a Valdoran warrior was merely difficult for a determined human. He reached her balcony just before midnight. Cathara stood by the window, staring at the stars. She spun around when Cole slipped through the curtains, her eyes wide. How did you? She started. No time, Cole whispered. We need to move to where the entire palace is against us, not the entire empire. Cole pulled out a small communicator. Before I left Nefkai space, I gave Sarah a way to contact me. The rebels are waiting. If you offer them real change, they will support you against Vorath. Cathara stared at him. You planned for this. I planned for something. Humans always plan for something. He held out his hand. You have a choice. Your radiance, flee to safety and live quietly somewhere far away, or fight for your throne and everything you believe If I fight and lose, they will kill me, yes, and you will die with me, yes. Cathara looked at his hand. She thought of her father who had ruled through fear and died surrounded by enemies. She thought of Vorus, who would turn the empire into a military machine that crushed all resistance. She thought of the Nethkai in their ruined temple, waiting for proof that change was possible. She took Cole's hand. Then we fight. They moved through the palace like ghosts. Cole led the way, finding paths that avoided patrols. Cathara followed, silent and focused. She had spent her life being protected. Now she was learning what it meant to be a warrior. At dawn they reached the throne room. Varth was there, preparing for the day's announcement. The elder council sat in their formal seats, some looking triumphant, others uncomfortable. The doors crashed open. Cathara walked in like a queen. Cole walked beside her, unarmed but unafraid. Behind them came a surprise that made Vro's face turn pale. Sarah of the Nethkai with 20 rebel fighters. This is impossible, Morith snarled. Guards, kill them all. But the guards did not move. They had seen the evidence that Cole had gathered over the past months, evidence of VTH's corruption, his secret deals with criminal organizations, his plans to start wars for personal profit. Cole had given copies to every guard commander during his escape, letting them choose which side of history they wanted to be on. I, Commander Varth, Cathara said, her voice echoing through the hall. You are charged with conspiracy, corruption, and treason against the Empire. How do you plead? Vor looked around desperately. His allies were abandoning him, stepping away as if he carried a disease. This is a trick, he shouted. Human lies. The evidence speaks for itself, Cole said calmly. 12 years of secret accounts, bribes to judges, murderers disguised as accidents. You were preparing to rule this empire long before you accused the Empress of treason. The Elder Council reviewed the data in silence. Then one by one they stood and turned their backs on Vorith. The fight went out of him like air from a broken balloon. He slumped to his knees, finally understanding that he had lost. Cathara nodded to her guards. Take him away. He will receive a fair trial. More than he planned to give me. As VH was dragged from the hall, Sarah stepped forward. You came to us with promises, she said to Cathara. The human said you were different, that you would listen. Was he right? Cathara looked at the rebel leader, at the hope and suspicion fighting in her eyes. This moment would decide everything. He was right, she said, and I will prove it, not with words but with actions, starting today. Behind her, Cole Matthews allowed himself a small smile. The random choice had become something much more, and the real work was just beginning. 6 months after the failed coup, the Valderin Empire was no longer the same. The changes had started small. Nefki representatives joined the Imperial Council for the first time in history. Labor camps were closed, their prisoners freed and compensated. Sacred sites that had been destroyed were being rebuilt with Imperial funds, and Valderin engineers working alongside Nefkai builders. But the small changes had grown into something larger, much larger. Other subjugated species watched the Nefkai transformation with amazement. For generations, they had believed that the empire would never change, that resistance was pointless, that their children and grandchildren would live and die under Valderin rule forever. Now they saw something different. They saw an empress who listened. They saw a human who had proven that strength was not the only power worth having. And they began to hope. Delegations arrived from a dozen systems. They came not to demand or threaten, but to ask. Could they have representatives too? Could their sacred traditions be respected? Could their children have futures beyond service and labor? Kedara met with each delegation personally. Cole stood beside her, translating not just words but meanings. He had learned that different species express themselves in different ways, and what sounded like a demand from one culture might be a humble request from another. The old counselors grumbled about the changes. They warned that showing weakness would invite attack, that the Empire's enemies were watching for any sign of softness, but the attacks never came. Instead, trade increased, border tensions decreased. Species that had spent generations plotting rebellion began sending their brightest young people to the Imperial Academy, not as hostages but as students. The Nethkai rebellion officially ended on a bright morning in spring. Sarah came to the palace not as an enemy or a subject, but as an ally. She and Cathara signed a treaty that transformed the Nethkai from a conquered species into the first official partner of the new Valder and Commonwealth. Other treaties followed. The Empire was becoming something new, something that had no name yet, not quite an empire, not quite a federation, something in between, something that was still finding its shape. On the day of the first Commonwealth Assembly, representatives from 32 species gathered in the Great Hall. They came from worlds of ice and worlds of fire, from ancient civilizations and young colonies. They were different in every way that mattered except one. They were choosing to work together. Cathar stood before them, no longer just an empress but something more, a symbol of what was possible when power was shared instead of hoarded. This assembly represents a new beginning, she said, her voice carried to every corner of the hall. For too long, strength was measured by the ability to destroy. Today we begin measuring strength by the ability to build. We will not agree on everything. We will argue and struggle and sometimes fail, but we will do it together as partners, as equals, as members of something greater than any single world or species. The hall erupted in applause. Some cheered loudly, some clapped politely, some simply nodded in their species' traditional sign of approval, but all of them believed, at least for this moment, that the future might be better than the past. After the ceremony, Kedara found Cole standing on a balcony overlooking the city. The streets below were filled with celebrating crowds of mixed species, something that would have been impossible a year ago. You should be inside, she said, accepting. Congratulations. I am not comfortable with attention. Cole said humans rarely are. Kedara smiled and joined him at the railing. The council has made a decision. They want you to become the first Commonwealth ambassador to Earth. You would represent the entire Commonwealth, not just the Valderin, in negotiations with your home world. Cole was silent. For a moment, that is a great honor. It is, but I confess I have mixed feelings. Selfish feelings. She looked at him. You have become important to me, Cole Matthews, as an advisor, as a guardian, as a friend. I do not want to lose you. You will not lose me, Cole said. Earth is not far. I will return often, and when I am gone, you will have something more valuable than any guardian. What? Is that you yourself? Cole turned to face her. When I first arrived, you were a puppet. Others pulled your strings and told you how to move. Now, you are the one reshaping the galaxy. You did not need me to do that. You only needed permission to be who you already were. Kara shook her head. I would have failed without you. I would have been killed or removed or simply lost in the politics of the court, perhaps, but the courage was always yours. The vision was always yours. I simply showed you that other ways were possible. He smiled slightly. That is what humans do best. We are not the strongest or the smartest, but we imagine things that others think are impossible, and sometimes imagination changes everything. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. Somewhere below, different species laughed together, shared food, learned each other's songs. It was small and fragile and might not last, but it existed, and that was more than anyone had believed possible a year ago. I chose you by chance, Cathara said softly. A random point of my finger, made in rebellion against my advisors. I never expected anything, and yet here we are. Here we are. She was quiet for a moment. Do you believe in fate? Cole, I believe in choices, he said. Fate gives us moments, but what we do with them is up to us. You could have chosen differently 100 times. You could have let Varth win or crushed the Nethkai or ruled through fear like your father, but you chose to be brave again. And again, even when it terrified you. I was terrified, she admitted. So was I. Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act anyway. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. Tomorrow Cole would begin preparing for his journey to Earth. Tomorrow Kadara would face new challenges and new enemies who wanted the old ways to return. Tomorrow the fragile peace they had built would face its first real tests, but tonight they could simply exist in the moment. An empress who had learned to lead, and a human who had shown her the way. Somewhere in the galaxy, other empires watched the Valdarin Commonwealth with fear and confusion. They did not understand how an empire could grow stronger by giving up power. They did not understand how a random human could change the course of history, but understanding would come eventually. The old ways were dying, the new ways were being born, and at the center of it all was a simple truth that humans had discovered long ago. The strongest force in the universe was not weapons or armies or fear, it was hope. Cole Matthews looked out at the stars. Somewhere among them was Earth, the small world that no one had respected, the weak species that everyone had underestimated. He smiled. Let them underestimate, he thought. Let them believe we are nothing. We will show them what nothing can become. And in the great hall below, representatives of 32 species raised their glasses to a new era. The human era had begun.